Now, in my YouTube series of bringing progressive rock to newbies and seasoned fans alike, I've been unpacking some of the biggest, boldest and most creative bands ever to grace the rock stage. Now, in the video today, it's time to look at the second of the big six bands from this genre. I'm bringing to you an introduction to the band Genesis. And even if you are familiar with this band, I'm asking you to stay with me as I look to bring the background to the band that I know you'll all enjoy. This is going to be an incredible journey I have in store for you. So I'm going to look at the formation of the band and the Gabriel years, Gabriel's departure, and the Phil Collins takeover, the shift to pop and global success. Genesis were one of the most influential and adventurous bands to ever shape the progressive rock scene. From their humble beginnings at an English boarding school to their evolution into prog rock royalty, Genesis broke boundaries, pushed sonic limits, and created music that still resonates with so many today. But how did a band that started in the 60s, just as a group of friends experimenting with sound, go on to define an entire genre? So in this episode, I'm bringing you the incredible journey of Genesis. So the story begins in an elite British boarding school. It was 1967. The 60s were swinging and there was echoing across the world, but at a private school called Charterhouse in England, a group of students who were more interested in crafting a sound that went beyond what was already being played on the radio. Peter Gabriel, Tony Banks, Mike Rutherford and Anthony Phillips formed a band not for fame or fortune, but to experiment with music in a way that combined classical influences with the burgeoning rock sound of the era. The boys caught the attention of producer Jonathan King, who suggested they name themselves Genesis, symbolising a new beginning for music. But their first album, From Genesis to Revelation in 1969, was in many ways a false start. It was heavily orchestrated and produced to sound more like the pop records of the day, and as such it failed to capture what Genesis would eventually become known for. In fact, it sold so poorly that the band considered calling it quits there and then. Yet that sense of creative bubbling beneath the surface was undeniable. The seeds had been planted and it wouldn't take long for them to grow. Now, by this point, Genesis hadn't yet embraced the progressive rock sound, but Tony Banks' keyboard work, for example, leaned heavily on classical themes. And Peter Gabriel's lyrics were beginning to explore more surreal, complex storytelling ideas. Although that album didn't make waves, the group's determination to push on remained strong. So fast forward into the early 70s, and this is where Genesis truly started to come into their own. Now, after some lineup changes, including the addition of Phil Collins on drums in 1970 and Steve Hackett on guitars in 1971, the band's sound evolved quite dramatically. This was the start of what many fans called the classic Genesis era. Their third album, Nursery Cryme, released in 1971, marked a turning point, where the band fully embracing longer, more intricate song structures, blending rock with classical and literary influences. Gabriel wasn't just content with playing music, he wanted to tell stories. And he didn't just sing these stories, he acted them out, donning bizarre costumes, creating personas and captivating audiences with his larger-than-life stage presence. The live shows were as much theatre as they were concerts. Now, whether it was that haunting the musical box with Gabriel's eerie old man mask, or the grand apocalyptic epic Supper's Ready, the shows became really a sensory experience. Now, the aforementioned Supper's Ready, a 23-minute masterpiece from the album Foxtrot, was a prime example of how Genesis transformed a rock song into a complex narrative journey. They were pulling from mythology, from literature, and their own imaginations, creating something that was far more intricate than the standard rock songs of the day. Steve Hackett deserves mention, as his guitar work was another key ingredient. His innovative use of tapping and his deeply melodic approach to guitar playing helped to give Genesis their signature sound. Tracks like Firth of Fifth and The Fountain of Salmacis showed off his ability to weave classical technique into rock music, something that would influence countless guitarists in the prog world and beyond. But in 1975, after the release of the ambitious concept album, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Peter Gabriel shocked the music world by announcing he was leaving the band. Now, for many fans, Gabriel was Genesis. His voice, his theatrical presence, he seemed irreplaceable. How could the band possibly carry on without him? Well, Phil Collins, who had been the band's drummer since 1970, was initially hesitant to step into the spotlight. But after auditioning quite a lot of singers and finding none that really fit, Collins reluctantly agreed to give it a shot. And the result? It was a new Genesis sound that was born. Their first album after Gabriel, A Trick of the Tail, released in 1976, was a critical and commercial success. Fans and critics alike were surprised. Collins had not only filled Gabriel's shoes, but had brought something new to the table. And his more straightforward, emotive vocal style complemented the band's evolving sound. The follow-up album, Wind and Wuthering, continued in that same vein, balancing intricate progressive compositions with a slightly more accessible approach. Collins remained the band's drummer, and his dynamic, jazz-influenced playing style was a crucial part of Genesis's sound. The fact that he could sing and play drums at the same time, often during the band's most complex arrangements, became a defining feature of Genesis's live performances. Now, this dual role gave the band an energy that few other prog rock acts could match at the time. By the end of the 1970s, though, Genesis had once again evolved. The band's shift towards a more accessible sound was gradual, but by the time they released Duke in 1980, it was clear that they were moving in a different direction. Duke balanced the band's progressive roots with a more streamlined, radio-friendly sound. Tracks like Turn It On Again and Duchess still had the complexity Genesis was known for, but with shorter runtimes and more conventional structures. Then came Invisible Touch in 1986. This was a record that would take Genesis to heights they had never seen before commercially. With massive hits like the title track and Land of Confusion, the album dominated the charts worldwide. Some long-time prog fans felt, though, that Genesis had strayed too far into pop territory, but the band had found a way to blend commercial appeal with their progressive sensibilities. Even their pop songs had layers of complexity, both musically and lyrically. Genesis had done something few other bands managed to do by maintaining their relevance across 2 decades, transforming from prog rock pioneers into mainstream pop icons without losing their creative edge. Now, it is a testament to their talent, that their willingness to evolve and their ability to adapt to changing musical landscapes. But in this video on screen now, find out what happens when a flute-wielding frontman decides to mix folk, blues and hard rock into the prog rock formula in the next of our band intros for newbies.